Imagine a world where Japan never surrendered in 1945. What if, despite the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese government refused to yield? What if they chose to fight to the bitter end, believing that surrender was worse than annihilation? This scenario could have led to one of the most catastrophic and world-altering conflicts in human history. It would have rewritten the fate of not only Japan, but the entire global order. Stay with us as we unravel this chilling alternative reality and dive deep into the horrifying consequences of an unending war in the Pacific. In reality, Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, ended World War II. But it wasn't an easy decision. The combined pressures of the atomic bombings, Soviet entry into the war, and the crumbling of their military infrastructure left Japan with no viable option but to capitulate. However, some top military officials strongly opposed surrender, advocating for a last stand on the Japanese mainland, preparing for a final battle that would have turned the country into a blood-soaked battlefield. What if those voices had prevailed? What if Emperor Hirohito had been overthrown or assassinated for even considering surrender? If Japan had refused to surrender, the war would have entered its deadliest phase, Operation Downfall, the planned Allied invasion of Japan. This operation was divided into two devastating parts: Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, and Operation Coronet, the massive assault on Honshu, aimed at capturing Tokyo. U.S. military projections estimated that American casualties could exceed 1 million, while Japanese casualties, military and civilian alike, would have reached tens of millions. It would have been a war unlike any other, with no rules, no mercy, and no certainty of victory for either side. The first phase, Operation Olympic, would have begun in November 1945. The Japanese Imperial Army, reinforced with kamikaze pilots, special attack boats, and underground fortifications, would have turned Kyushu into a death trap for American forces. Thousands of suicide attacks, from planes to submarines to civilians with explosives, would have made every inch of progress costly. Despite their overwhelming firepower, the Allies would have suffered unprecedented losses, while Japan, believing in its divine right to resist, would have fought until every last soldier, woman, and child had perished. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, having declared war on Japan in August 1945, would have launched a full-scale invasion of Manchuria, Sakhalin, and even Hokkaido. Stalin, always eager for territorial expansion, would have seized the opportunity to carve up Japan just as he had done with Eastern Europe. The Soviet Red Army, battle-hardened from fighting Nazi Germany, would have clashed with the remnants of Japan's forces in the north. This could have led to Japan being split into two occupied zones, one Soviet, one American, creating a Cold War battleground in Asia decades before Korea or Vietnam. As the war dragged on, Japan's cities would have been subjected to relentless firebombing. Tokyo, already devastated from previous raids, would have been reduced to ashes. Osaka, Nagoya, and countless other cities would have become lifeless ruins. Food and medical supplies would have dwindled to nothing, leaving millions of Japanese civilians to starve. In desperation, the government might have resorted to mass conscription of children and elderly into combat units, ensuring that no one was left untouched by the horrors of war. Propaganda would have fueled nationalistic fanaticism, encouraging mass suicides rather than surrender. Facing a prolonged conflict, the U.S. might have resorted to additional nuclear strikes. Nagasaki and Hiroshima were just the beginning. Targets like Tokyo, Kyoto, and Sapporo could have been next. Some estimates suggest that if the war had continued, as many as 10 atomic bombs could have been used against Japan by early 1946. The death toll from atomic bombings alone could have soared into the millions, forever altering the course of global history and potentially setting a precedent for nuclear warfare as an accepted strategy in future conflicts. Alternatively, the U.S. might have chosen different methods to force Japan's surrender. A naval blockade combined with continued conventional bombings would have strangled Japan's economy. With no access to raw materials, fuel, or food, Japan's war machine would have crumbled from within. However, this strategy would have meant prolonged suffering for its people, leading to famine, disease, and anarchy. Japan could have descended into chaos, with different factions fighting for control over the remnants of a collapsing empire. The Soviet invasion complicates things further. What if Stalin had seized significant portions of Japan before the Americans could act? A divided Japan, akin to Korea or Germany, could have emerged. The northern half under Soviet control, the southern half under American occupation, leading to a Cold War conflict on Japanese soil. This could have led to proxy wars, uprisings, and even a divided Tokyo, much like Berlin, with an iron curtain slicing through Japan's heartland. A communist North Japan and a capitalist South Japan could have become another flashpoint in global politics. Would Japan have seen a Korean War-style conflict? Would a divided Japan have changed the balance of power in Asia? Perhaps Japan would have been a Soviet ally, shifting the balance of power in the Cold War dramatically. Or maybe it would have turned into a Vietnam-like battleground, with insurgencies, U.S. interventions, and a prolonged struggle that shaped the modern world in ways we can barely imagine. With Japan refusing to surrender, China's civil war between the communists and nationalists could have taken a different trajectory. Perhaps Japan's prolonged war would have weakened the nationalists further, accelerating Mao's victory and creating an even stronger communist bloc in Asia. This in turn would have put enormous pressure on the U.S., possibly leading to earlier interventions or an entirely different Cold War strategy. The global order would have shifted drastically. The U.S., drained by an extended Pacific War, might have delayed its focus on Europe, altering the course of the Cold War. Would the Marshall Plan have been possible? Would the Soviet Union have gained even more influence, shifting the balance of power further in their favor? In the worst-case scenario, nuclear weapons would not just be a tool to force surrender, but a method of warfare. If the U.S. and the USSR both deployed atomic bombs, a nuclear apocalypse could have erupted, leading to devastation beyond imagination. What if Japan had been the first battleground in a full-scale nuclear war, setting a precedent that shaped the world into an irradiated wasteland? If Japan had continued its resistance, the psychological toll on its people would have been unimaginable. The government's relentless propaganda campaign would have driven civilians into desperate measures, leading to armed uprisings and guerrilla warfare long after major battles had ended. Even if the Allies had occupied Japan, they might have faced years of violent insurgency. The extended war might have prevented Japan's post-war economic miracle. Instead of rising as a technological superpower, Japan could have remained a war-torn wasteland, struggling for decades to rebuild itself amid occupation and internal conflict. But let's return to our reality, where Japan did surrender, and the world was spared the horrors of Operation Downfall. The economic miracle of post-war Japan, its rise as a technological superpower, and its peaceful integration into the global order all stem from that fateful decision to end the war. This alternate history reminds us of how fragile history truly is. A single decision, a single moment, could have led humanity down a radically different path. It serves as a testament to the impact of diplomacy, leadership, and the choices that shape our world. Now we turn the question over to you. What do you think would have happened if Japan never surrendered? Could the world have survived such a brutal extended war? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into an alternative history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more intriguing scenarios. We explore the what-ifs of history so you don't have to miss out on the most fascinating possibilities.